Hello and welcome to AgriFocus, the podcast from Agriland that looks in depth at some of the topical issues of the day. I'm Stella Meehan and I'm joined today by Manuelle, Iamakami, Peguini and Matthijs Bremer from DCA Market Intelligence, a company that provides need-to-know market intelligence for the food and agricultural industry. We're going to discuss beef markets at the moment and what is impacting them, why farmers are seeing factory prices decline, and where the trajectory might be headed. Agriland has been reporting this week that factory quotes have seen beef price offers decline by a further 10 cent a kilo as forward store cattle buyers continue to count their losses. Factory beef price offers in Ireland have now fallen by about 90 cent to €1 a kilo since the start of this year. Analysis published this week by DCA Market Intelligence outlined a number of factors which may impact the global beef trade currently. So let's get into it. Manuelle and Matthijs, thank you for joining me. Firstly, Matthijs, I want to refer to the global beef market up to, let's say, the end of 2025 or the start of 2026. It was doing pretty well. And in the past few years, certainly in Ireland anyway, we've seen some historical highs for beef price. But since the start of this year, would it appear that the beef market globally is heading into a new and different phase?
You can say that, yes. The beef market globally has one big problem, and simply demand in key regions, especially China and Europe. In Europe, we're really seeing suppressed demand compared to the last few years. That's the biggest factor, just clearly.
And Manuelle, in terms of the markets themselves and what impacts what comes back, we'll say, to the primary producers, which would be the beef farmers, we know that cattle supplies are tight across Europe and in the United States. So does this not bode well for beef price, or are there other countries now moving in to fill that gap, for example, in the US?
I feel like the cattle herd supply in the EU and the US is declining, maybe in a slower pace if we look at the data for 2025. But like, for example, we have Australia and Brazil as really big players in the market. And in Brazil, we still herd is increasing and slaughter numbers as well. So I think there's a big question in the market as well at the moment with the China quota situation, because Brazil has filled around 65% of the quota already, and the expectations is that they're going to use it entirely by the beginning of July, and Australia already 90%. So they are already also almost finishing their quota. And then there are really big export markets that has been breaking export levels for this year and Brazil last year as well in the market. But where are they going to go with that much of volumes once this quota is filled? And US can come as a good opportunity, especially for Brazil. For Australia is already one of their main markets, but lots of the meat from Brazil can go to the US as well. And Brazilian meat is cheaper at the moment. And the prices in the US are very high as well.
This is true. And actually, I'm glad you brought that up. I guess we can't talk about the global beef trade without speaking about China's impact and that country stringently enforcing quotas on beef imports itself. So, what will be the ripple effect? China is trying to become more self-sufficient in beef production. It's also limiting the imports. And as you mentioned, Brazil and Australia would have been countries who had large amount going into the Chinese market. But China really is a key player here in terms of shifting the dynamic of the global beef market, would you say, Manuelle?
Yes, for sure. I think so. If we look at the first quarter imports from China, they actually increased. I think it was kind of a race of Brazil and Australia trying to fulfill the quotas. If I look at my numbers, exactly they increased by 27.5% just in the first quarter. But the expectations, I think, around the market is that in the second quarter, once everything is resolved, they're going to decline. And also, if we look at China's supply, is still tight at the country. But yeah, it's difficult to say what is going to be the direction. But for sure, it's going to impact the trade flows in both biggest producing countries at the moment. And they are going to have to look for new markets.
Exactly. Matthijs, I might come back to you. Apart from the economics of various countries importing or exporting more to different markets around the world, is basic consumer demand also dropping for beef? And if you think so, why do you think that is?
On a global scale, I think it is, especially in Europe. And I want to add something about the situation in China that's, I think, quite important to this discussion, because over the last few years we have been seeing quite a weird pattern in China. Actually, we have seen that a lot of exports have been pushed to the country because prices are naturally high in that country, even if demand is relatively low. And that was the situation we've been seeing for years. And the government actually chose to take these steps because of like these strict quotas, because the prices were getting suppressed so much that in China, where production is very expensive, their farmers can't really make a profit. So what we've been seeing is that in China, because of the bad economic situation, like their economic numbers are quite good compared to what we're used to, but they're quite artificial. There's a lot of unemployment, especially in the youth. The demand for meat was down there for a few years, especially for beef, since that's a really luxurious category in China, of course. And in Europe, also demand is suppressed considerably. We see a lot, that the consumption is a lot lower, especially in food service, compared to the last few years. And there's one big exception, and that is the United States, actually, where demand, despite very, very high prices, stays high. And that's actually because of diet trends you've been seeing. I don't know if all of us are active on social media. If we're like looking at the plates of influencers and you see lots of beef, sometimes like 80% of a plate is beef trimmings, is minced, and that has really had an impact on the market there. So what you're actually seeing is that the demand is suppressed in most countries, but the demand is so high in the US that's the reason that prices are actually kind of still holding up. You know what I mean? Prices are not imploding because the US is actually putting a lot of pressure on the demand side, and that makes the situation very unstable globally.
Absolutely. That's very interesting. And going back, Manuelle, to a trade deal which has been igniting concerns, certainly in Ireland, particularly over the past year, is that between the EU and the Mercosur countries of South America. Now, as we know, Brazil is a bit of a beast, I suppose, when it comes to beef exports, if you'll pardon the pun. But how impactful will that trade deal be, particularly in the context of Brazilian exports of beef to the EU market?
I think at the moment, at the short term, would be not that impactful. But also at the moment, without the discussion about Brazil being removed from the list of countries can export animal products to the EU due to the antimicrobial concerns around it, and they have to resolve it until September 3rd, otherwise they cannot export products to the EU. But the quota is 99,000 tons, right, Matthijs? Around that, and Brazil, I think last year export, if you consider all the countries together, is a small quota taken into consideration, but there's this whole situation into the sanitary environmental compliance with the European standards that we have to wait and see. Will Brazil complying with the standards? Do they have the traceability of the cattle since births until they are slaughtered and sent into Europe to comply to it? So it's a wait and see situation.
Okay, well, certainly, as you mentioned there, probably nothing in the short term, but maybe the long-term impacts then can be assessed at a later time, and whether or not they meet those particular criteria where it comes to antibiotics by that September 3rd date. Back to yourself, Matthijs. From your analysis at DCA Market Intelligence, where you guys follow trends and benchmark commodities, where would you see yourself, the beef market, headed, we'll say in the short to medium term, 6 to 12 months?
Yes, I can give some expectations, but the situation is kind of weird at the moment, because there's a lot of tension. So the first thing I want to say is that yes, we can kind of give an outlook or a direction, but there is a very good chance that it will not play out that way because the last 2 or 3 years have been very special. We have seen very weird developments, and the geopolitical side, of course, also very important to consider. If something weird happens, everything can go out of the window immediately. But the market isn't strong. I think we should mostly focus on Europe now for this prediction, so to say, or direction. We don't predict, but we can give a direction based on the facts that are at hand, of course. And the direction is quite negative for Europe at the moment because, on the one hand, we see that the demand is very low. There is still a very low supply of cows, but there is quite a bit of meat in the freezers and the freezing capacity in the cooling houses, and there is a bit of a standoff between the farmers and the slaughterhouses at the moment, and there is from all sides there isn't really a willingness to really give in and make a big step towards a higher or a lower price. And because of that, the tension of low demand will probably still exist for the next few months. And of course, you'll have an uptick around Christmas every year. You'll have that, but I see no reason for demand to strongly increase without big decreases in price at the moment. Unless something happens that's unpredictable, of course.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, Manuelle. I mean, as Matthijs referred to there earlier, with that consumer demand a little lower than it was previously because food prices are increasing. That's just a fact. And while demand is strong in the US, Brazil is trying to meet that particularly. So, for EU beef, as Matthijs said there, it's probably quite maybe volatile at the moment, and unless there's some sort of massive drop in the price of beef where consumer demand significantly increases, would you agree that it's probably not headed on an upward trajectory if we move it all the way back to the supply chain to the primary producer, the farmer?
Yeah, I don't think it's an optimistic situation at the moment, at least for Europe. Also, when we look at the Brazilian prices for live cattle, they have already reached their peak in April. I think it was around $73.5 per 15 kilos. There they're measuring arroba. So that is the situation. But now by season patterns, they should start to decline again as well, priced in Brazil, which put also more pressure in other markets because they already had very low prices. And now if they decline even more, and also with the Chinese situation putting more pressure, and demand could still pick up if they are still fighting for more quotas from China, or they're trying to redirect volumes via Argentina, Uruguay, or Paraguay, or even the third quarter they could have a bit of an uppeak if we have more demand in Brazil with the World Cup and elections there. But it's not an optimistic market, I would say, for either regions at the moment.
And Manuelle, what do you think will be the biggest factor for the likes of you guys now in DCA Market Intelligence over the next 6 months? Where will you be looking to keep an eye on which way the shift will be in the beef market? What countries or markets will you be really looking at?
I think for sure Brazil, the whole situation with China, Australia. Also, for example, New Zealand is a market that we also look in together with Australia in that way. But New Zealand, from what I last checked, they were not that prominent in the market at the moment. Argentina and Uruguay as well, they have increasing exports to the US quite firmly. And they also, in the case Brazil is banned then from exporting to the Europe, then Argentina and Uruguay and Paraguay could enter the market, and they also have more standard beef quality compared to European beef of higher quality. And of course the US, I would say. But there's also smaller markets, for example, Korea or Japan, that are big importers. And Japan was also, from what I last saw, in a wait and see situations, seeing if prices are going to decline, then they can increase their imports. But it's still a supply constrained market as well.
Okay, I understand. Well, thank you so much for joining me. That's all we have time for on this episode of AgriFocus. Thanks to my guests, Manuelle, Iamakami, Peguini and Matthijs Bremer, both from DCA Market Intelligence, for joining us today. If you found this episode interesting, please rate and review it on all the podcast platforms or share it with someone you know who might like to listen. You can also get in touch with us with any comments or feedback on this particular episode by emailing info@agriland.ie. Until next time, goodbye and take care.